Hi, hand readers. Jennifer here, long-time practitioner, teacher, and author of all things to do with hands and hand reading. When we look at the hands, we're really looking for that which jumps out at us, something that seems very noticeable. And this is certainly the case when it comes to knotty fingers. I personally have found that it's not that common that you get extremely knotty fingers, but any amount of knots in fingers is definitely going to tell a story. And then in today's chat, I'll juxtapose the conversation around meanings for knotty fingers with some thoughts about very smooth fingers. As I've mentioned in last week's video, the fingers represent something of how we think. There's an analogy of the palm representing the body, the fingers representing the mind, and the lines and dermatoglyphics representing spirit. So we have this concept of body, mind, spirit encapsulated in the hands. And with fingers that are particularly long, it shows a more protracted thought process. If fingers are particularly short, it shows much faster, more spontaneous thought processes. And one can really see quite a lot about how people think from their fingers. Now, knots will restrict the thought processes. It's as if the knots create a kind of a pause in the thinking, as if there's a reduced spontaneity. Mental expression might be a little slower and more ponderous and more careful. The person will question before they believe anything and delve into all the pros and cons before they act. So in essence, we could say that knots increase deliberation, examination, and analysis. They definitely aspect a more analytical type of minded person. And there would be also very likely in that person's life a more philosophical interface with their world. We also look at the level on which the knots actually appear. So we've got the lower level, which is the knot, they're known as the knots of the material order. These are the knots that are closest to the palmar surface. And then the knots of the mental order. And each of these have different associated meanings as well. So knots of the material order has to do with the kind of a tidiness of the mind. The person might not be physically tidy, however. The idea here is that the person really likes to systematize and organize, and particularly if it's on the earth finger, the middle finger of the hand, the Saturn finger in palmistry, if the knot appears here, there might be an obsessive need in the person for tidiness. A meaning that's often associated with knots of the material order too is an argumentative nature. Knots of the mental order are also known as philosopher's knots. These are the kind of knots that you don't see as commonly as the knots of the material order. They appear between the fire level phalanges, which is the middle level of phalanges, and the tips of the fingers, which are known as the air level phalanges. Now, these knots signal the deductive person who's governed by reason. They'll take time to ponder, reflect, calculate. They probably have very deep-rooted convictions, and they'll have a concern for detail and for method. Now, like in this image here of a very knotty hand with long fingers, we could suggest that the person would be moderate in their pleasures. They would have quite shrewd insight, very much rather quite skeptical before they come to any conclusions. There would be a critical faculty, quite evolved and developed. And this feature, especially in long fingers, would add the interest in research. The analytical type would be very much aspected here, someone who inquires and desires information. And now to juxtapose with very smooth-fingered people, the mind is more free-flowing, there'll be more impulsivity, especially if the fingers are slightly short in that case. The shorter the fingers, the more impulsive the person, generally speaking, as it is. And then the longer the fingers, the more the thought process predominates. Generally, we could say that people with smooth fingers have an uninterrupted flow of thoughts, whereas people with knotty fingers have their thoughts interrupted by this analytical faculty. And lastly, I'll just mention that if the fingers are particularly flexible, like mine are, you can see that they bend right backwards, then this would counteract to some extent the effects of the knot, whereas if the fingers are very stiff and held hard, if the hands are particularly hard, that would intensify and activate the meanings associated with knotty fingers. Now, if you'd like to have a reading with me online that works brilliantly, it's fascinating actually just how closely I can feel you based on photographs of your hands. Please email me for more information. You'll find my email address at the end of this video. And I also teach 3 marvelous courses. If you're interested, I'll certainly send you the prospectus for all the 3 courses. And next week I'll be talking about healing stigmata. I'm digressing slightly from fingers for the moment because I've had a request to speak about healing stigmata. And keep the requests rolling in, please. I love hearing from you, and I'm happy to talk about anything that particularly interests you in the realm of chirology and palmistry. See you next week. Bye for now.